Here with Carrie Cherveny. I said that right? I was a little bit nervous on that. But I'm going to call you Carrie. We're on a first name basis. But as far as you're the PEO guru, that's the reputation that you have. And glad you're on my team because, obviously we'll throw out acronyms, right? Insurance industry loves that. My experience, right? Getting into the PEOs and learning about PEOs, I've always been on the outside being a P&C agent, P&C producer. So getting into it, I'm curious to know about kind of the do's and don'ts, why someone's in a PEO, maybe why someone shouldn't be. Everything I've learned has been kind of failing, right? Trying to get clients on my end, like trying to carve out the workers' comp and things of that nature. So, but one thing that I do kind of want to clear up is the difference between a PEO and a payroll administrator.
Great question.
That seems to be clients sometimes get confused.
Absolutely, and it's a perfect place to start. So in a PEO environment, you are literally moving all of your employees off of your own tax ID number and your own standalone platform, and you're moving them over to the PEO's tax ID number, which makes the PEO the employer of record for tax and payroll purposes. That empowers or enables the PEO to do several other things, including provide workers' compensation and provide employee benefits, which are two driving forces for many clients to go into a PEO to begin with.
That's the added value.
Correct. Okay. Correct. Because PEOs have buying power.
Scale. Yeah.
Exactly. So in a scalable environment like that, where you've got thousands of people on a health plan, you ostensibly or arguably have better buying power and more leverage in the marketplace to build out a more competitive program than Bob the plumber with 50 or 75 or 150 employees who's out there on their own.
Sure.
But there's a lot of nuances to that can make that a pro or make that a con.
Well, I think a big thing too, and maybe what gets confusing is sometimes it could be a la carte. You can maybe carve out some services, and sometimes, again, going back to payroll administrators, they're running payroll and some additional services. And what makes it a true PEO was transferring that tax ID number.
Correct.
That's the black and white area.
Correct. That really distinguishes between what we used to call employee leasing and today call PEO versus a standalone basis where you do what's called ASO, administrative services only. That's when you go out and you identify a payroll provider or a technology solution to handle your payroll, your benefit administration, your applicant tracking, and you use your own tax ID number, pay your own employees, place your own insurance policies, and you, the employer, Bob the plumber, for example, are the plan sponsor of your work comp, your health insurance, your dental, et cetera.
And you mentioned employee leasing, because that's another kind of buzzword that you used to hear more often. Is that more geared to the initial thought of kind of temp labor, or was that just a different term of how PEOs have evolved?
So in the early days, like we've been in this long enough, and I'm old enough now to say in the early days, which makes me feel really old. But in the early days of PEOs, it used to be leasing, and you literally shifted all of the employees, all of the employer-employee obligations, and the associated risk to the leasing company. And then you leased back your employees. So you leased back your labor, but everything else remained with the leasing company. That's not a sustainable model. It wasn't a sustainable model because you can't move all that risk from a third party that you don't really have enough control over into these insurance policies and think that these carriers are going to continue to sustain these claims and sustain these risks. And so the model has evolved, and I really think it has evolved into more of a business partnership and a business outsourcing, which is why you see some PEOs that allow you to carve out comp and some don't. Some PEOs allow you to carve out benefits and some don't. Every PEO builds out its own platform and its own model based on its perceived value and marketability and competitiveness out in the space. The big, large PEOs are usually an all or nothing proposition.
Take it or leave it.
Take it or leave it.
Right.
Work comp, benefits, payroll, taxes. Either you give us everything or you give us nothing. Some of the smaller, more agile PEOs are more customizable, more boutique-like. There's a guy here in Fort Lauderdale that just sold his PEO, and he built the model for each and every client. Now, you paid a price for that.
Correct.
But you could pick and choose what programs you outsourced to them and what you kept for yourself. Other than the tax ID, that is a threshold, has to.
And that makes sense because, obviously you look at buying scale, larger PEOs, maybe some of the smaller ones are tailored to, maybe they're HR focused, and that's kind of the caveat to go with them. carve out the comp and so on and so forth.
Exactly. These smaller PEOs don't have that scalability, and so what they're really building is a boutique experience and a true partnership. Not all of them. Again, every PEO is different, but many of them are building that boutique partnership with their client companies.
Well, one thing that, again, I'm on the outside. I'm sitting in the stands, right? The game's being played with the PEOs. But one of the things that I've heard, right, trying to approach clients, it doesn't seem there's a lot of either transparency or maybe some confusion in terms of like how the PO works, how to get out of PO. Is there any advice or like step one, how to bring up that conversation? Like me as a PNC agent, I'd love to hear that because we're going to talk about that later. Actually, we're doing a workshop here at the office.
We are.
So it's step one, because even from a confidence standpoint, I think a lot of times us as sales people, we kind of stick to what we know, and if we don't know, we tend to kind of leave it to the other experts. But what would be your advice for anybody who wants to bring it up, right? How do you poke that veil that seems to be kind of a web of different kind of avenues?
Absolutely. So just like in the model themselves, PEO revenue models generally vary PEO by PEO, but there are some constants. PEOs make money in at least 3 ways, sometimes 4. They make money on their admin fee. Everybody knows that. That's not surprising. What is surprising to most people is that many PEOs, not all, but many, mark up the SUTA and mark up the workers' compensation. Because remember, when you're a client company and a PEO, you're sitting in a tax ID number,
right,
along with a whole bunch of other client companies. And that PEO is managing a portfolio of tax ID numbers, a whole bunch of tax ID numbers filled with a whole bunch of client companies. So the billing that the PEO receives on taxes and on workers' compensation is based on the totality of the client population. And then they carve that up and disseminate it amongst the client companies that owe for SUTA and owe for work comp. And they build in a revenue line for it. The PEO's perspective is, if we're going to serve your unemployment, if we're going to serve your workers' compensation, we're going to charge you a fee on top of the workers' comp and premium that we're being charged for your employees. The challenge to your question, I know this is a really long answer, sorry.
No, it's great. It's great.
Sorry, listeners.
It's great.
Is that many PEOs are not willing to reveal that there is a markup or what that markup is. Some are.
Well, I mean, are they the admin fee? And by the way, reading a PEO quote, I mean, and it's complicated as I could tell you. I mean, it's just one of the most complicated things in the world. But I know the admin fee is broken out, but the markup on the comp, is that something that has to be disclosed?
No. So because it's not a premium, and because the client company is not the policy holder of the workers' compensation, the disclosure rules do not apply to the client company.
Interesting.
The disclosure rules apply to the policy holder, which is the PEO. So the PEO does not have to disclose. Now, we at Hub have built our own proprietary tool to back into the fees to do what we call a cost comparison that we'll talk about later in our meeting.
Sure.
Where we're able to unpack and reveal pretty closely to accurate, there's some art to it, what those markups are and what the actual costs are in versus out.
Right.
But I'll tell you that I've seen the PEO industry evolving and moving on this point. So I was just doing a cost comparison yesterday, and I was very pleasantly surprised to see that the PEO provided almost all of the data. Now, what generally happens is you'll find, if you're looking at just the admin fee, most of these PEOs will bundle the comp or bundle the SUTA inside of the admin fee. And that's where it becomes difficult to figure out the real cost. And you've got to look at them on a standalone and back in, which is a really complicated process to say. There's a way to find the numbers, but they don't make it easy.
Well, I mean, just bringing into an account, I mean, how transparent is it for an actual company to have it? Like, I know insurance-wise, right? You ask for a declaration page, loss run, so on and so forth. But getting a PO, is it just based on the invoice? Is that where you can back into those fees, or the original contract?
I actually have to get a data dump for the first pay period of the year and dig into the actual data associated with the payroll and all of the employer costs. The invoice isn't going to give me enough. The invoice is a nice check and balance, but I've got our poor clients and prospects running pretty large reports and putting them into Excel for me. And those cost compares, just to give you an idea of how complicated that analysis can be. I've had cost compares take me as long as a full week to be able to dig in, parse it all out, pare it down, do the analysis, check myself the liberal arts girls doing heavy math. This is frightening. And identify a real number.
Well, I mean, are these contracts, I mean, they're annual contracts, right? Renewed on an annual basis?
Some are, some aren't. Again, PEOs are going to vary. I have seen an increasing movement to 30-day contracts, but there are still, unfortunately, many PEOs that will lock you into a contract. And if you don't give notice of termination inside of your tiny little 45 or 30-day window, you are stuck and you are paying term fees. There is a PEO that I've done business with that had a client for 12 years, and the client missed the window to terminate the contract by 2 weeks, and the PEO charged them $27,000 in term fees.
Wow.
Now, we're seeing less and less of that, but this is the stuff that makes it really unfortunate for PEOs, because all it takes is one PEO.
From a reputation standpoint,
right.
too, right? Some of the older, bigger ones that just kind of, they enforce the contract instead of looking or being transparent as far as being a true
right.
partner, right? That's what PEOs are supposed to be.
And there are many good PEOs out there that are true partners, but you just got to know the questions to ask. So to your point, how do I know what questions to ask? How do I know if I'm doing business with a reputable PEO that will value our partnership and respect our relationship? And these are the tough questions that you've got to be able to ask your PEO. Asking them about things like the markups on the SUTA and the workers' compensation. The other interesting revenue point for PEO is the tax savings associated with pre-tax deductions and employee benefits. So employers offer a robust employee benefit plan. They take the employee cost on a pre-tax basis. It reduces the gross taxable wage base, and then the employer tax match is less. Same reason you do pre-tax 401k deductions, right?
Correct.
In most PEOs, or many PEOs, they will bill you on gross and tax you on gross instead of net. So you never get that tax savings associated with offering a 125 plan.
Interesting. I mean, and even going back to like fluctuations. So, I mean, workers' comp rates tend to fluctuate annually, right? I mean, do they have to disclose if those things either decrease or decrease? Like, are rates locked in annually, or do they fluctuate on, as far as your agreement with the PEO?
So keep in mind, so PEOs have a really interesting work comp platform because they are pay-as-you-go, right? So the client company has predictability, and you can get pay-as-you-go plans outside of PEOs today as well.
Right,
there was
correct.
a time you couldn't, but today you can. And my finance friends really like PayGo because it's predictable.
And it's no surprises.
Right, they can budget it.
Well, the workers' comp carriers started realizing that was an added benefit and start to evolve, right? Why not do it? Same thing.
Right, 100%. But the PEO is still going through an audit at the end of the year with the work comp carrier to reconcile claims, premiums, and dollars, because we're all in it to make money, and so are insurance carriers. So they are going to re-audit those programs, and PEO clients may see an increase in workers' compensation fee. Remember, it's not a premium, but a fee over the year before, depending on what those claims look like. So even though your risk is pooled, just like in the health insurance, your risk is pooled inside of a PEO, the PEO still has the ability to track and identify claims and losses so that they can identify which client companies are cost drivers and pass some of those increases along to those client companies. The challenge, however, is on the back end, and we talked about this earlier, most PEOs will not provide loss runs to client companies exiting the PEO. So when you leave that PEO and go out into the marketplace for your own work comp or your own health insurance, you have no loss runs.
Right, it's a challenge. Well, and then, so they just won't provide it. So how do you, is there a specific strategy if you're curious about leaving a PEO? Should you ask for loss runs prior to them knowing you're looking to get out?
The minute you ask for loss runs, they know you're looking to leave.
I mean, so how does that affect your mod, right? Maybe you went into the PEO because it was an employee benefits angle or HR angle, but your mod was, 0.85. When you come out, you're going to lose that savings, correct?
Correct.
You get to reset at 1? You're
going to at least reset at 1. Depending on whether or not you're in a monopolistic state. God, I got that word out correctly, thank God.
Big one.
It is a lot of syllables. You're going to be rated on a number of data points, right? So the carrier is going to take into account a number of factors. Now, in some cases, the PEO will provide the client company with the ability to run a report on accidents and injuries. It's usually like an accident and injury report or something to that effect. And that will help inform the carrier, and it will influence their decision, but it's not a true loss run, but it's helpful. At least it's a view.
It's something to look at.
Right.
And that's
at least
kind
it's data.
Right. It's data. And that's kind of the biggest issue. It's funny, you'll get payroll administrators trying to get breakup PEOs, and comp's kind of the piece, or it's the employee benefit side. But not being able to get that data, it's obviously the challenge to find a comp carrier, right? Not knowing or not being clear on losses. If it's I don't want to use the word, if it's a 50-50 industry, right? We're not talking about a law office or something clerical. Anybody will do that. But anything within manufacturing, not getting into the roofers, but anybody with a little bit of hair on it, traditionally, it's almost impossible.
So I unfortunately have seen I bought my own EPLI, but I'm in a PEO and have their EPLI circumstances do more harm than good.
Really?
Because what happens generally, again, I'm speaking in generalities, but what happens generally is each EPLI policy will have language in it that says, hey, we come second if you've got someone else. So when you've got two policies and you've got a claim, let's say you have an EEOC charge of discrimination, and you put the PEO on notice, and somehow the PEO EPLI carrier knows or learns that you have EPLI coverage in your professional lines package, for example, the PEO EPLI carrier is going to go, wait a minute, we're a second clause, right? We come second. Go to your professional lines EPLI, and your professional lines EPLI is going to say, wait a minute, we have a clause in our policy that says we come second. So then the carriers are doing this.
Oh, it's a standoff.
Yes. And the only way to get coverage in that case is to pay both deductibles. And I have seen it happen to clients. So there are PEOs out there that will allow you to carve out EPLI from the PEO and have your own EPLI. Otherwise, unless you're ready, willing, and able to pay two deductibles, ride with the PEO EPLI.
Right. I mean, it just seems like it's one of those things from a transparent standpoint. I mean, I understand that most people don't understand what EPLI is anyway.
Right.
I mean, we have enough time selling it standalone to employers. Everyone assumes it's part of their GL policy. But I mean, initially, right, when they say EPLI is included, most people just kind of stop there. Is there a transparent, portion of the contract that breaks out if wage and hours included? Is that something that's really transparent as far as a separate carve-out deck page? How would an employee know that?
So that is such a great question. EPLI policies for PEOs are more limited, as you can imagine, because the carrier is 2 steps removed from the actual insured and the actual decision makers and actions that are creating the risk and the claims. So EPLI insurance in a PEO is more limited. You rarely see third-party coverage. You might see FLSA defense costs, but in some cases not at all. You should be able to get a deck page, at least, that provides the parameters. In the PEO where I used to work, we created our own summary document that was blessed by the carrier where we laid out all of the coverages and the limits. Okay. You probably won't get your hand on the actual policy because, again, it's a master policy that covers so many employers.
In your opinion, why would someone, and I know this is a very broad question, right? But, kind of pros and cons, what would be an ideal candidate to be in a PEO?
Great question. So back in the day, the answer used to be high risk, high claims. Really, it was insurance driven or turnover driven, high suitor rates. But there was something happening in the business that was driving the business costs up and getting inside of the PEO, scalability, risk pooling. I could bring my costs down. Today, PEOs guard their claims and their claims pools and their portfolio pools of clients just as closely as we guard our clients' claims pool and risks and risk management, right? You have to because the world of insurance has become very expensive. Another great reason to be in a PEO is administrative ease. If you're an entrepreneur, if you're growing like crazy, if you're in M&A activity and you don't have the horsepower, the staff, the talent, the people, the resources, a PEO will be helpful as compared to not having the resources. M&A activity can be tough in a PEO. They're not going to move as quickly. They're not going to be as invested and understand the deal generally like your own staff will. Right.
Okay. And then to kind of circle back on that part, why would someone, is there a kind of a threshold where maybe you get too big to be in a PEO, or why would someone shouldn't be in a PEO?
So there's a lot of reasons, just as there are a lot of good reasons to be in a PEO, there's a lot of good reasons to not be in a PEO. Client companies, like you described, low mod rates. great claims experience, and if the only reason you're looking for is administrative ease, I wouldn't go into a PEO. There are other ways to ease administrative burdens than necessarily going into a PEO if all other factors are financially feasible and affordable for you.
Right.
It really comes down to your unique business needs and your business model and who you are today and where you want to be tomorrow.
I mean, it's again, the I guess from the outside in, the transparency, being able to kind of define the PEO both from the employer and kind of like finding those potential landmines. It's something that I'm interested in. I'm glad you're on my team. You know, we're going to do a little workshop later on, but it's something that I'm definitely excited about be working with you in the future.
I'm excited. And if a group is looking at going into a PEO, they should definitely have a conversation with somebody who knows and understands the industry so that if you are going to go into business with a PEO and be in a PEO partnership, you pick the right model that works for you, your short and your long-term goals. And Hub at JAG are here to help.
There you go. Carrie, the PEO guru.